Have you ever noticed something strange happens when you stop chasing someone? The moment you stop reaching out, stop initiating, stop trying to hold the relationship together, suddenly they're interested again. They text, they call, they act like you're the most captivating person in the room. It feels confusing, like emotional whiplash. You ask yourself, did I imagine the distance? Were they just overwhelmed? But deep down, something doesn't sit right. Let me be clear, that shift in behavior isn't a coincidence. It's not chemistry. It's not fate. It's psychology. And if you're feeling emotionally exhausted, insecure in your relationship, or like you're constantly on trial just for having needs, then I promise you what I'm about to share will bring clarity you didn't know you needed. My name is Jim Rohn, and I help people break free from emotionally imbalanced relationships, especially ones that trigger anxious, insecure patterns. If you've been caught in a push-pull dynamic with someone avoidant, someone who gives just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to make you feel safe, this video is going to connect the dots in a way that changes how you see the entire situation. Because here's the truth that avoidant partners don't want you to fully realize: the problem was never that you wanted too much. It's that they were never prepared to meet you at the level of depth and intimacy you deserve. And once you finally see that, once you stop blaming yourself, stop over-explaining, stop emotionally performing to earn affection, the power dynamic shifts. And that shift is exactly what avoidance can't handle. In this video, I'm going to break down what's really happening underneath avoidant behavior, the psychological defenses, the fear of vulnerability, and the cycle they unconsciously repeat. But more importantly, I'll show you what happens when you finally stop playing the role of emotional caretaker. You'll understand why your emotional clarity becomes so disruptive to them, and why stepping into your worth is the very thing that breaks the cycle. If you've ever felt like you were begging for breadcrumbs while shrinking your needs, you're not alone, and you don't have to keep living like that. So if you're ready to stop walking on eggshells and start honoring your emotional truth, go ahead and subscribe. Because what you're going to learn today won't just help you understand avoidant partners, it's going to help you come home to yourself. Let's get into it. Now let's break this down a little more, because when you're in it, it can feel really confusing. 1 minute everything feels amazing. You're texting all day, talking late into the night, making spontaneous plans. You feel seen, desired. It feels like the connection you've been waiting for. But then, something shifts. Maybe you open up emotionally. Maybe you ask a vulnerable question like, where do you see this going? Or, I'm really starting to care about you. Suddenly they go quiet. The replies slow down. They say they're busy. They seem distant, distracted, and you feel like you're the only one trying to keep the momentum going. This is the exact moment where so many people start blaming themselves. Maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I scared them away. Maybe if I just give them more space, they'll come back. And that's where we fall into the anxious avoidant trap. You start shrinking, softening your needs, walking on eggshells, hoping that by being less, they'll re-engage. But here's what's really going on beneath the surface. Core insight. Avoidantly attached individuals tend to withdraw when emotional intimacy deepens. They're not afraid of you, they're afraid of what being fully seen, needed, or counted on might require from them. Emotional closeness feels like a risk they don't know how to manage. They often thrive in the beginning stages of connection when things are light, playful, and undefined. Flirting, banter, short bursts of attention. No problem, that's low risk. But the moment the relationship starts asking for something deeper, like consistency, emotional availability, or real accountability, they pull away. It's not always obvious at first. Sometimes they retreat slowly. Other times it's sudden, like a switch flips. But either way, it can leave you feeling like you did something wrong. You didn't. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've been dating someone for a few months. Things feel great. You're texting every morning, seeing each other a few times a week. One night, after a particularly intimate evening, you say something like, I feel really close to you lately. The next day they're different. Less responsive, less present. A few days later, they mention they need space. You're left spinning, wondering what you said. This is a classic avoidant deactivation response. Intimacy triggered their fear of being emotionally vulnerable or too exposed. It wasn't the content of what you said. It was the closeness it created. But here's where everything starts to shift when you stop internalizing their withdrawal as a reflection of your worth. The second you stop thinking, what did I do wrong? And start thinking, what's this showing me about their capacity? Everything changes. You step out of self-blame and into clarity. Instead of chasing them, you begin observing. Instead of over-explaining, you start setting boundaries. And instead of clinging to crumbs, you get clear on the kind of consistency you actually deserve. This is the moment avoidance can't handle, not because you're being unkind or demanding, but because your emotional clarity removes the one thing they've relied on to stay in control, your self-doubt. And that's exactly where your power begins. Let's talk about what's really going on beneath all the confusion, the hot and cold behavior. The sudden distance, the vague explanations like "I've just got a lot going on" or "I'm not sure I'm ready for something serious." If you've heard those phrases and felt like your heart just dropped, you're not alone. What you're experiencing isn't random. It follows a very specific psychological pattern that's tied to avoidant attachment. And once you understand it, you stop feeling crazy and start seeing things clearly. Here's the heart of it. People with avoidant attachment don't fear you. They fear vulnerability. They fear being known too deeply, seen too clearly, or counted on too consistently. For them, closeness doesn't feel comforting, it feels unsafe. That might sound confusing, especially if you're someone who craves intimacy and connection. But for someone with an avoidant style, intimacy often registers as danger. Not because they're cold or incapable of love, but because somewhere along the way, maybe in childhood, maybe in past relationships, they learned that emotional closeness leads to pain. Maybe they were let down when they needed someone. Maybe they were taught to suppress emotions to avoid criticism. Whatever the root cause, the result is this: closeness feels like a trap, not a gift. So when emotional needs start showing up in a relationship, like needing reassurance, consistency, or even just open communication, they begin to pull away. Not because you ask for too much, but because their nervous system interprets that emotional closeness as a threat. What follows is a familiar pattern. They start sending mixed signals. One week they're all in, planning dates, saying how much they've missed you. The next week they're distant, distracted, and less available. And when you bring it up, they may downplay it or even turn the focus back on you. Suddenly you're too sensitive or overthinking things. They might say, "This is why I need space," or "You're putting too much pressure on me," even though what you're asking for is basic emotional presence. Take this for example. Imagine you've been dating someone for a while and things seem to be going well. You open up about how much the relationship means to you. You express that you'd love to know where things are headed. They smile, nod, and say something like, "Yeah, me too." But the next few days they go quiet. They stop texting like they used to. Plans get pushed back. And when you ask what's going on, they respond vaguely, "Just stressed, need some space," or "Nothing's wrong, I'm just figuring stuff out." This is emotional distance being disguised as independence. It's how they self-protect when the risk of being emotionally available feels too high. Then, just when you start to detach, maybe you stop initiating, stop sending the long check-in texts, they reappear. Like clockwork, they sense the shift, and suddenly they're interested again. That warm version of them resurfaces. They might say they miss you, that they've been thinking a lot. It creates a cycle where you keep hoping this time will be different. But unless they've done deep emotional work, it usually isn't. This is the push-pull dance avoidants rely on to stay in control. The emotional closeness threatens them, so they push you away. The emotional distance threatens you, so you pull them back. And around you both go until one of you steps out of the loop. And that's exactly what happens when you stop seeing their distance as a reflection of your worth and start seeing it as a reflection of their fear. That shift is what breaks the pattern. Here's where things really start to change, and honestly, this is the moment that avoidant partners often can't handle. It's when you, the person who has been trying so hard to hold things together, finally pause and say to yourself, "Wait a second, this isn't about me being too much. This is about them not knowing how to be close." That one realization can change everything. When you finally understand that their distance, their shutdowns, and their avoidance are driven by fear, not your lack of worth, it hits different. You stop thinking you need to be better, cooler, less emotional. You start thinking about what you actually need in order to feel safe and loved. This is the shift where you stop playing the role of emotional caretaker. You stop being the one who sends the long text trying to clear the air after they go quiet. You stop trying to decode their one-word answers or make excuses for their emotional inconsistency. You realize you've been doing all the heavy lifting. You've been managing the connection, smoothing out the awkward silences, and tiptoeing around their triggers, all in the name of love. But that's not love. That's emotional overfunctioning. That's walking on eggshells, hoping your calmness can hold the whole relationship together. And it's exhausting. Imagine this: you've been dating someone avoidant for several months. Every time things get emotionally close, they start pulling away, skipping plans, replying late, or acting cold. You find yourself writing another message to clear the air, telling them how much you care, how you didn't mean to pressure them, and how you're totally fine giving them space. You reread the message 3 times before sending it, trying to get the tone just right so you don't scare them off further. And after all that effort, they give you a half-hearted thanks for understanding and go dark again. That moment where you're left feeling unseen, unheard, and like your love needs to be micromanaged just to be received, that's the moment when something inside you finally says enough. And when that moment comes, you start shifting your energy inward. You stop asking, how can I make them stay? And start asking, what does this dynamic cost me emotionally? You start paying attention to how often you feel anxious, confused, or like you're waiting for scraps of affection. You start realizing that chasing emotional clarity from someone who avoids it is a game you no longer want to play. Instead of staying hooked on the high of those rare warm moments, you begin craving consistency. You begin to prefer peace over passion that comes with panic. You begin choosing stability over chemistry that burns hot and cold. This shift doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity. It comes from a deep knowing that love should feel safe, not like a test. That your needs aren't too much, they're just not met in this dynamic. And once you start showing up for yourself the way you've shown up for them, everything begins to change. You don't need to beg for love anymore. You simply create space for a connection where you don't have to beg in the first place. A key insight often overlooked in the anxious avoidant pattern is that the desire for intimacy, dependability, and straightforwardness isn't a sign of being too much. It's a basic human longing. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in your healing journey is learning to see yourself through a secure lens. That means no longer viewing your emotional needs as a burden, and no longer twisting yourself into knots to make an inconsistent person feel comfortable. It means realizing that your desire for connection, your need for emotional safety, and your longing for clear communication are not signs of being too much, they're signs of someone who's ready for real intimacy. And I want you to hear this loud and clear. A relationship that keeps you doubting your place is not love, it's anxiety. You should not feel like you're always trying to earn affection or decode mixed signals. If you're constantly left wondering where you stand, second-guessing your last conversation, or trying to make sense of someone's hot and cold behavior, then you're not in a stable connection. You're in a cycle. And that cycle isn't about compatibility, it's about fear and control. The anxious avoidant loop thrives when one person overfunctions emotionally while the other pulls away to regulate their fear of closeness. But when you stop feeding into that dynamic, when you stop explaining, chasing, or emotionally bending, everything changes. Let me give you an example. Imagine you've stopped initiating. You're no longer sending just checking in texts or trying to smooth things over when the energy shifts. Instead, you're sitting with your discomfort, letting the silence speak. You're listening to your gut instead of overriding it. That's when the avoidant partner often re-engages, not because they suddenly had a breakthrough, but because they sense the emotional tone has changed and it rattles them. They're no longer in control of the pace. They can feel that you're no longer waiting anxiously on the other side of their emotional walls. That loss of control feels threatening to them, not because they've truly lost you, but because they've lost their ability to dictate when and how closeness happens. What this tells you is powerful. Your presence in the relationship was never the problem. It was your self-doubt that kept the cycle going. Once that's gone, you start showing up differently. You stop managing their comfort at the expense of your own. You let things be mutual or you let them go. And when you do this, the dynamic shifts from imbalance to honesty. Either they start showing up in a real way, or they fall away, and either outcome gives you clarity. This is secure framing. It's not about building walls or pretending you don't care. It's about having enough self-worth to say, I'm not going to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's limitations. It's about honoring your emotions without apology. And when you move from that place, everything you do feels less reactive, more grounded. You stop acting out of fear and start living from a place of truth. Let's talk about something really important: closure. Not the kind where someone sits you down, gives you a perfect explanation, and neatly ties everything up with a bow. That would be nice, but let's be honest, it's not how things usually go with avoidant partners. Real closure, the kind that actually gives you peace, often comes from within. It's the moment you stop waiting for them to get it. You stop waiting for the apology, the change, the version of them you kept hoping they'd become. Instead, you give yourself permission to say, this dynamic no longer works for me, and I don't need their validation to move on. That's powerful. That's empowering closure. You deserve a relationship where love is given freely, not one where affection feels like a reward for how much emotional labor you're willing to do. If you've been walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting your tone, managing their moods, and overthinking every message, then you've been in a system that was never sustainable. Relationships aren't supposed to feel like emotional boot camp. You shouldn't have to earn consistency or affection. Love that's real doesn't make you feel like you're chasing it all the time. It shows up. It chooses you back. Let's say you finally stop chasing. You're no longer texting first. You're no longer trying to fix the tension or prove that you're worth staying for. Instead, you've stepped back. You're taking care of yourself, reflecting, reclaiming your energy. And then, out of nowhere, they come back with just enough warmth to test if you're still emotionally available. Maybe they say, "Hey, I've been thinking about you," or "I miss what we had." It stirs something in you, right? Because part of you wants to believe this means things have changed. But here's where your clarity becomes your power. You get to respond from a place of self-respect, not reactivity. You ask yourself, does this feel consistent? Does this meet me at the level I deserve? If not, you lovingly walk away, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. And here's what happens when you start showing up this way. The cycle breaks. Your standards shift the emotional tone of every interaction. You're no longer coming from scarcity, hoping they'll give you crumbs of connection. You're coming from grounded self-worth. You know what you bring. You know how deeply you love. And you know that none of it should be wasted on someone who only leans in when they feel you slipping away. This shift will do one of two things. It will either inspire the avoidant partner to grow, to step up, to face their fears, to meet you in a healthier way, or it will reveal that they're not ready to meet you at all. Either way, you win. Because when you stop chasing, you stop delaying the clarity that's trying to reach you. You stop pouring into something that's leaking energy. You stop settling. So if you're here now, standing at the edge of letting go, know this: walking away isn't failure. It's growth. You're not giving up on love, you're giving up on patterns that kept you small. And what's waiting for you on the other side is a connection that doesn't make you beg to feel chosen. The truth is, loving someone with an avoidant attachment style can often feel like an emotional roller coaster. One day they're warm and engaged, and the next they're cold, distant, or even dismissive. It's confusing. It makes you question yourself. Did I say too much? Was I too needy? Should I pull back so they come closer? You start overanalyzing every word, every text, every silence. But here's the truth. When you're caught in that cycle, you're no longer experiencing love, you're managing anxiety. You're dancing around their comfort zone while completely abandoning your own. A woman I once worked with, let's call her Sarah, dated a man who would disappear emotionally every time things got too close. When she opened up, he'd shut down. When she needed reassurance, he'd say she was too intense. So she adapted, became quieter, more low maintenance, even though her heart was screaming for connection. Over time, she was accepting breadcrumbs, occasional attention, a kind text here and there, a weekend together every now and then, as if it were a full-course meal. But those crumbs were never enough to nourish her emotionally. And deep down, she knew it. The problem was, she thought needing more meant she was the problem. It didn't. What Sarah eventually realized, and what I want you to really hear, is that walking away from breadcrumbs isn't about punishing someone. It's about choosing not to starve. The moment she stopped trying to prove she was enough for him to fully commit, everything changed. He didn't rise to meet her. He disappeared. And yes, that was painful, but it was also clarity. She was no longer trapped in the fog of confusion. She could finally breathe again. See, when you stop accepting the bare minimum, you send a very powerful message, not just to them, but to yourself. You say, my needs matter. You say, I won't shrink myself to keep someone comfortable. That shift is powerful. Avoidants often thrive in relationships where the other person overfunctions, doing the emotional work, holding the relationship together, walking on eggshells. When you stop doing that, they either have to grow or go. And if they go, let them. That exit clears space for someone who wants to meet you where you are, not keep you guessing. This isn't about blame. Avoidants often carry deep wounds themselves: fear of engulfment, fear of losing autonomy, childhood experiences that taught them closeness equals danger. We can have empathy for that without excusing behaviors that leave us hurt, anxious, and lonely. Your job isn't to heal them. Your job is to take care of you. This is not about villainizing avoidance. It's about reclaiming your self-worth when you've been stuck in a dynamic where love feels inconsistent, conditional, or unsafe. Once you stop accepting breadcrumbs, you shift from proving your worth to protecting it. That's the moment avoidants can't handle, because it requires them to meet you where you are or step aside. And either outcome, that's your freedom. So if any of this resonated with you, If you felt yourself stuck in that push-pull dynamic, questioning your worth, or accepting less than what you truly need, just know you're not alone. The journey back to your self-worth isn't always easy, but it's worth it. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's the most courageous thing you can do. When you start showing up for yourself, setting boundaries, and refusing to settle for emotional crumbs, your whole world starts to shift. You stop chasing love and start attracting it, the kind that's consistent, safe, and rooted in mutual respect. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really supports the channel and helps get this message out to more people who might need to hear it. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were settling for breadcrumbs? What helped you start to reclaim your worth? Let's talk about it down below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, take care of your heart and remember, you're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person.